If Martin Luther King, sitting in a jail cell in Birmingham, when he wrote that letter, had been told by some angel, Martin, you're going to sacrifice your life. Let me give you a deal, though. In about 40, 50 years, there'll be a black president. He'll be reelected. There'll be back-to-back black secretaries of state. The CEO of McDonald's will be a black man. The black population, if it were a separate country, would be the 15th wealthiest country in the world. He'd take that deal. He'd take that deal. And yet we're still talking about whether or not racism is still a major problem in America. Are you kidding me? Are you smoking something? All these men and women who fought and died to get us to where we are right now, it is easier now for a black kid to get into a college or university because of affirmative action. A black college-educated couple compared to a white college-educated couple where both work, the black couple earns more money than the white couple. And yet we're told that racism remains a major problem in America.
What are the 5 biggest issues facing blacks in America? Here's my list. Problem number 5, the victim mentality. Nothing holds someone back more than seeing himself as a victim. Why? Because a victim is not responsible for his situation. Everything is someone else's fault. And the victim sees little chance of improving his life. How can he get ahead if someone is holding him back? All this makes the victim unhappy, frustrated, and angry. This is how too many blacks see themselves, as victims. So much so that their victim status becomes their primary identity and their ruling ideology. I call it victimology. Unfortunately, many black churches preach this victimology. Many black parents pass it on to their children. Inner city schools teach it to their students, and the black media reinforce it. Meanwhile, the NAACP and other black grievance groups fundraise on it.
So the idea from the Black Lives Matter group, movement, is that if you are black, you are inherently victimized in the United States, that the U.S. Is making you a victim right now. It's not that the U.S. has made you a victim in the past. That we all agree. I mean, the fact is that if you're a black person living in the United States and you have a grandpa who lived in the United States, he was living under Jim Crow if he was living in the South. If you go back far enough, then he was living under slavery. So to pretend that there hasn't been victimization of black folks in the United States in the past would be silly. It'd be silly and stupid because, of course, that's not true. But the idea that the United States, as currently constructed, is designed to harm black people is also not true.
Lack of diversity. Blacks repeatedly demand an honest dialogue or debate about race. But how can there ever be an honest dialogue about race between blacks and whites when there is virtually no honest dialogue between blacks and blacks? It's hypocritical. And if a black doesn't think whites are ultimately responsible for black people's problems, they're labeled a sellout, Uncle Tom, or race traitor. As long as this type of groupthink exists, race reverence of the Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson type will continue to be celebrated, while independent black thinkers such as Professors Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams will be shunned. The honest race dialogue and debate that first has to happen is not between blacks and whites, but between blacks and blacks. We demand diversity from others, but need to practice it ourselves where it really matters, in thought, opinion, and even political affiliation.
In 1960, 5% of firstborn children were born outside of wedlock. I'm talking about 5% of all children. Right now that number is 43%. In 1965, Daniel Patrick Moynihan wrote a book called The Negro Family, A Case for National Action. In it, he argued that at 25% out of wedlock birth rate, the black community was facing a meltdown, and we needed to get our handles around this ASAP. He said there was going to be a direct relationship between that and crime, that and dropouts, that and drug dependency. You name your social problem, a direct relationship between that. Fast forward. 75% of black kids today are born outside of wedlock. 85% at some point will be living in a home without a father. 50% of Hispanic kids outside of wedlock. 35% of white kids, 10 percentage points higher than when he wrote that alarmist book. Now, clearly we're less racist now than we were in 1965. You cannot blame racism. How can it possibly be racism?
The disintegration of the nuclear family has led to an astronomical increase of single-mother households. According to the Moynihan Report, in 1965, nearly 25% of black children were born to unwed mothers. The report's author, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, said this was a disaster in the making. He was, of course, vilified by so-called black leaders and their progressive allies. But he was right. Today, the out-of-wedlock birth rate is nearly 75% and even higher in some urban areas. To be clear, Baby daddies share this responsibility with baby mamas. Yet, while baby daddies are blamed and rarely shown compassion, baby mamas are rarely blamed and receive both compassion and support. This lopsided dynamic and the previously listed pathologies stem directly from the #1 problem facing the black community.
So one of the arguments that's made is that black folks are disproportionately poor in the United States. Now, some of that is absolutely attributable to the fact that generational wealth exists, and that if your grandpa wasn't that rich, there's probably a better chance that you're not quite as rich. That's true. But government cannot decide to correct cosmic injustice. Okay, current day injustice does not fix past injustice. Saying that my grandfather hurt your grandfather, therefore you get to steal my wallet, that is not justice. And pretending that government can come in and rectify all cosmic imbalances, all historical imbalances, actually perpetuates current injustices. The reality is, in a free country, it's not about fixing historical wrongs. It's much more about making sure that right now you have the right to equal access. Right? And what that means is, again, not that you're going to have equal wealth. It doesn't mean that we have to give you money. It doesn't mean that we have to have affirmative action. It does mean that no one can get in your way. This is the basic American right. The basic American right is no one can get in your way. And if someone gets in your way, then we get them out of your way. Because that's what the Constitution is designed to do.
So you got a bunch of Black Lives Matter. Think of what they're saying. They're saying that every problem they have requires white folks to do something. Well, Black Lives Matter really is saying that they believe white folks are superior. They believe white people owe it to themselves to take better care of their animals. They're saying, I can't take care of my problems, you're responsible. They will say it. They will say things like, you better start caring about us more. Are you kidding me? How can you care about me? I'm grown. Why would you? They believe in white superiority. They believe it. They're comfortable in that. So they'll come and demand for white folks, I need a $15 minimum wage. When they should be saying, I need to find out how to get a maximum wage.
The idea that there's a disproportionate number of black people in poverty simply because of Jim Crow or because of slavery, that is definitely not true. Okay, the black middle class was growing faster in the 1950s than it was growing in the 1960s after the end of Jim Crow, and that has nothing to do with racism. If the argument is that too many black people are poor now, or that black people are worse off now than they were in 1970, you have to ask yourself a question. Is that because racism increased in American society? Of course not. Racism has not increased, it's radically decreased in American society. In fact, 10% of all marriages in the United States are now interracial.
As just about everyone knows, but too few talk about publicly, in majority black cities, violent black-on-black crime is rampant. A Department of Justice study from 1980 through 2008 revealed that blacks accounted for almost half of the nation's homicide victims, 47.4%, and more than half of the offenders, 52.4%, all while being 13% of America's population. The Tuskegee Institute conducted a study of all known lynchings of blacks that occurred between 1882 through 1968. During this 86-year span, which is essentially the post-Civil War era up to the Civil Rights era, 3,446 blacks were reportedly lynched. Presently, black-on-black murder eclipses the number of blacks lynched over the course of 80 years, roughly every 6 months. Unbelievably, the culpability for this disproportionate amount of mayhem actually lies with a menacing 2 to 3% minority within the black populace. I call them urban terrorists. And since they are literally spawned from problem number 2, the black community protects them.
But the face of gun violence in America is not some white kid in the suburbs. It's that 15-year-old girl who performed at Obama's inauguration. It's a 7-year-old Latina who was shot, one of 4 or 5 people shot in about an hour in Chicago last year in May. We're supposed to fear that somebody like George Zimmerman is tracking down black people and looking over our shoulder at being racially profiled. Of the homicides in this country, half of them were black victims. 96% of the black victims had a black perpetrator. The fact of the matter is that racism is no longer a major problem in America anymore.
71% of poor families with children are unmarried. The poverty rate among non-married white families was 22% as of 2008. The poverty rate among black married couples that same year was 7%. What happened to the racism? Why is it that black married couples are doing better than white single families? Well, it's because it has to do more with the decisions that are being made than the color of the skin. And by the way, if we're going to talk about disparity in income and the idea that that's all racially motivated, you have to answer one question. Why is it the highest family income is among Asians in the United States? Because the Constitution was written in Korean for Asian people. The system was designed just for Asian people. Okay, if Asians have never been victimized in American society.
They're going to white folks and say, I need low-income housing, instead of saying, let me figure out how to get high-income housing. And so they want better education. Folks, the libraries are free. You can even go and monitor a class in college for free. If knowledge is power, go get it. What you're saying though is a degree is power. A degree is not power. Knowledge is power. So Black Lives Matter. I was called by a gentleman that I support in running for governor. He said, Mason, every time I go out, they're going to put a microphone in my face saying, does Black Lives Matter? I don't know how to respond to that. I said, respond. Look at the camera and say, it doesn't matter if I believe Black Lives Matter. If you believe Black Lives Matter, join me and make Black lives better. Join me and let's build up black income. Join me, let's build up black schools to be right. Join me, let's build the black family together. If you believe Black Lives Matter, act like Black Lives Matter to you.
Problem number 1, unquestioning allegiance to so-called progressive policies. Unwavering loyalty to progressive liberal policies is the primary reason these dire conditions persist. It both makes them possible and perpetuates them. It's no coincidence that progressivism is the common thread that binds predominantly black cities where single-parent homes, failing schools, rampant poverty, and crime predominate. Look at cities like Detroit, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. They've been run by progressive Democrats for decades. If their liberal policies were at all effective, these cities should have become models of economic growth and prosperity. Instead, they're models of dysfunction. By fostering and exploiting the victim mentality, discouraging self-examination, subsidizing baby mamas, and making excuses for black thugs, so-called progressive policies don't alleviate the problems that afflict the black community, they aggravate those problems. You may have noticed that racism did not make the list. Why not? It's simple. There will be no solution to the problems afflicting Black America until more blacks recognize that the issues plaguing our community are ultimately self-inflicted. Does racism exist? Sure, but there are other problems far more serious. And waiting until there are no more races will mean waiting and making excuses forever.
Freedom of speech is everything. And I should know, I come from the Middle East. I escaped that which you don't want to have replicate here in Canada. So no more language police, no more thought police, no more echo chambers that shun intellectual diversity, no more identity politics, no more culture of offense and the ethos of perpetual victimhood, no microaggressions, no trigger warnings, no safe spaces, and no cultural appropriation. Science, reason, and logic trump ideology and feelings. Thank you very much.